I'm not surprised.
Good,
hopefully he feels
Commissioner
better.
Branch is not coming back this afternoon.
Okay.
His dentist isn't allowing him to.
Oh, okay, well, that's not good.
Well, I've had phantom pains, I got blown off the back, just nasty.
Well,
Because your lips.
backaches are my worst. I don't have problems with my teeth, but I test the back.
Yeah.
Because of having it worse.
You didn't put down in the minutes or anything that my face was like flat today in our discussion or anything like that?
And I'll of course tell everybody when they're in session past our public hearing, but he called. He asked him to hold the letter for a week,
Oh.
so. He assured me it's going in, but not this week, so. I guess we'll go from there. But,
Larry Gilman came up right about noon to see if y'all needed any more information. And he said if you do, he's on a better track now in terms of being able to provide accurate information. He
Wasn't looking in the right place?
He wasn't. He says, we're not collecting for any EMS district in Oroville.
Well, we know that.
And I said, I know, we're not, because the levy didn't pass in 2018 to be able to collect this year. And he basically said, I don't know anything about anything that happened before I became assessor. So, because a lot of that information did
Oh,
not
I
get
got,
relayed
right, gotcha, so
from
it was just in the wrong place.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
aren't collecting any, well, you're right.
Right.
You're not,
Right.
for the last however
And
many
for him
years.
to know the boundary, maybe he just, like, again, maybe he just was in the wrong place.
He didn't know.
You take the information you have and kind of extrapolate it. I unfortunately do that from time to time.
Me too. Thinking? Oh.
The hearing exam is actually
Depends on
Oh,
online,
right.
but I said I haven't done that yet.
Okay.
So it's 1:31 right now. Can I,
Other than to announce we currently don't have a quorum and we'll wait, there's not much
nothing I can do.
you can do. So,
I was just gonna ask if we could, take a recess or something like that, but I guess since I'm not with quorum,
recess per se.
Haven't started.
We can formally not do anything until we have a quorum.
Okay.
We can continue it to later today.
Crowd demanding that you do one thing or another.
I know. Maybe if we can call Commissioner Dietrich, find out where he's at. Commissioner Dutro, let's see where he's at, and maybe we could continue this for a half an hour, that's possible.
Commissioner Dutro's about 4 minutes away. He got detained by the previous PUD commissioner,
Okay.
and so he's late
Okay.
because of that.
We can just
I think-
start the public hearing and announce that we were delayed due to lack of quorum, so.
Okay. So, I will, open the public hearing, and considering that we do not have a quorum on board right now, we will wait until we do have one, which should be in about 4 minutes.
Yeah, that's good.
I was afraid I'll push the wrong button. The screen will roll up,
Any of
or all the
those.
lights will go off or
Shouldn't
something.
affect anything, except the red line. The red line.
They had the button on their cheap laser pointer and something happened, I don't know what it was now. but
Yeah.
Caused me some concern. But,
Just playing.
Did you break something?
Not yet. Well, I think each computer has a different version of Windows,
Great.
you know, so it's like, this one's a little different than,
I wouldn't know. But when I've got it home, I'll do something and put it on a thumb drive and to bring it up here to work on, it always tells me all sorts of horrible things are gonna happen.
so says, you're using 85 versions behind of
Exactly, but
Windows.
it
Yeah.
doesn't seem to make any difference.
Sorry,
That's
guys.
all right.
I ran into our old PUD commissioner at lunch, and I thought we just had Perry session, I didn't get into the public
So
hearing.
I opened up the public hearing and just for lack of quorum.
Okay,
So we're open and
all right, sounds good.
you can direct.
So we'll open it up to staff, correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioners. For the record, I'm Perry Houston, Director of Planning and Community Development for Okanogan County. As you've indicated, you are in public hearing to consider the adoption of Ordinance 2019-10, which put into place amendments to your official zone control map on an interim basis. Now, your public hearing is a procedural requirement by 367795, which requires that when you adopt interim controls without a public hearing, which you did, you're required to conduct a public hearing within 60 days. 2019-10 was adopted on June 10th, 2019, so we're well within our 60-day window. Amend it, view the zone code. We're required to do something with our interim controls within 6 months. You're generally granted a 6-month extension if you made substantial progress. I anticipate that the zone code, following the adoption of the new comprehensive plan, will be completed within that time frame. So, the reason you've done what you've done, why don't we go to the map? I guess let's first talk about exactly what we have done. So, in the lower Methow reach, let's see, where am I? There I am. In the lower Methow reach, and the exact boundaries, I don't believe are on this.
Doesn't look like it.
No, you had a fair amount of rural. As you know, in the Methow Rule 173.548 feet per second of water has been set aside in reserve for domestic uses and stock water. The 2 CFS is senior in priority date 2 appropriate. So, with the SSB 6091 adopted in January of 2018, now is bound by the legislature to explicitly regulate permit exempt wells. So all of the old discussions about whether it has authority over groundwater or not, for the most part, would seem to be behind us. So what we've done is take an approach where we track the water used against the 2 CFS reserve. Now that's still a work in progress in terms of putting the tracking system in place. As you know, we've sought money and hasn't been awarded yet, but it has been to actually conduct additional analysis and create that well tracking program. This is now on a county-wide basis. So what we have done influence the Columbia River as opposed to that which would impact the Methow. So the city expansion is Brewster Flats or otherwise district has, with 3-year interim action, been changed to R5. So what was once a minimum acre lot size, what was once the possibility between undeveloped and new lots of 15,520 has now been reduced to 2,075. Go ahead. What we've done, and there's 2 approaches that we have taken. The aspect study approach and the Department of Ecology guidelines. The difference between the 2 is primarily that aspect assumed consumptive use indoor, but not a remarkable amount. And of course, all of these figures report what those 2 developed and the potential new parcels. Aspect study would indicate that if all of those were to build out, you'd need 1,448.9 acre feet of water in the 2 CFS reserve. So depending upon which methodology, which approach you take, you have reduced the amount to what is likely to be an acceptable amount of water or not. Now, I've done, it's not on this slide, I didn't think to do it until after we came over here. But if you take the developed lots and the undeveloped lots and don't make any new ones, using the aspect approach, you would require 812 acre-feet of watershed. Developed lots means exactly that. It means in the assessor's code, it shows sufficient improvement on site that it comes up as developed. Now, it could be a barn, it could be a commercial store, there's a number of different things that it could be that don't necessarily use exempt wells. It could be prior to 1970 lots. Each one of those potential new lots won't necessarily be on a permit exempt well. We haven't done that level of detailed analysis. So what we're looking at is really kind of a snapshot to see what you have. Now, in doing the calculations on the old numbers, you were well in excess of your 2C available through the 2 CFS reserve. Questions of staff?
So, if we look at,
Right.
okay, those total lots,
That was new lots, as I recall them. So those were backed out. If any of the developed lots were capable of subdivision, then that was backed out. So there was some adjustment.
okay, so now based on these new interim controls, what's our total number gonna be of lots
Go up to the interim control.
that can exist in the
So,
lower reach?
yeah, on this one, of the existing lots, 3533, 1503 is developed, 2030 are not developed.
Right.
Of all of those, 353 are capable of further subdivision now under the new zoning, which would result in 2,575 new lots. So to
Okay,
get
so
to,
if it exists,
understand that that's already been done. 25, 70, 50, I'm saying something that's not working, but in here, okay?
okay.
So to get to the water numbers, I added the undeveloped lots,
Existing lots, plus new lots, to get to the total water usage.
well, again, the developed lots, now one could argue you should add them all up. Because
Well, 35, 33 is developed and undeveloped.
and undeveloped, right,
Yes.
right. So the numbers aren't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Back to,
To exist, if this happens, I'm gonna see 6,108, it looks like.
I mean, it assumes a lot of things. It assumes all the lots that have been created are buildable. It assumes they will be done.
Right, no, I know,
All those things.
bulk lot. That doesn't take into account the fact that some of those are on 50-degree slopes or anything like that.
None of that analysis was done.
Yep.
So we did enough to create a snapshot, if you will, kind of a statement of the potential impact of the old zoning that was in place versus now the interim control. I mean, moral of the story, we've had a substantial reduction
Right.
in the potential new lots.
The groundwater use, though, that was the thing that was confusing me. So based on 4,605 undeveloped potential new lots, 4,605.
That should.
Oh, yeah, okay. So you would need an additional 1,057 or 1,867.
Right,
But the 2 CFS, but that doesn't take into account the existing lot, or
no.
development.
On exactly where we are, we need to go through the existing developed lots and figure out what that means. Same with the undeveloped lots, figure out where they are and what would their potential water source be, whether they're buildable or no. And then the same exercise with the potential new lots. That hasn't been done, so. So we're still a work in progress. The interim controls were put in place. I mean, at first glance, obviously, with the potential new lots under the old zoning, there's an obvious disconnect between the potential new lots and the available water supply. Other questions? Public hearing, obviously, public comment is appropriate, and we can go back over your different options at the conclusion of that.
Check call staff and see if anybody signed up for public comment. Okay, we have two, Laura Super and Katie. Laura, you are first.
I brought a larger device to read from today. I'm Laura Super, Program Director for the Methow Valley Citizens Council. I sent our comments around noon today, and I didn't print a copy before I jumped in the car, so I'm just going to read them out loud. The Methow Valley Citizens Council appreciates the opportunity to comment on the adoption of interim amendments to the official zone map. The mission of MVCC is to raise a strong community voice for the protection of the Methow Valley's natural environment and rural character. We agree that adoption of this interim measure is necessary to avoid creation of additional lots for which a determination that adequate provisions for potable water as required by RCW 5817-110 cannot be made. Domestic purposes allowed by WAC 173-548, the Methow in-stream flow rule. While we support the adoption of the proposed interim zone change, we are concerned that there still may be an inadequate quantity of legally available water to support the number of anticipated new lots in this reach. As you are aware, our view of the Methow rule differs from the current county interpretation of how the rule restricts use of permit-exempt wells. Simply increasing the minimum lot size to 5 acres is not likely to sufficiently limit density to assure that water is legally available for all potential future development, and I would add under the current in-stream flow rule. We assume that adoption of this interim measure indicates the county's recognition that in order to comply with the requirement of legal and physical water availability to support additional building, lot density in the lower valley must be reduced in the new zoning code as well as in this interim measure. Consequently, we anticipate that the county will give serious attention in further development of the new comp plan and zoning code to better aligning development with available water supplies. Water availability, however, is not the only factor that should be considered in managing future development in the lower Methow. As long ago as 2008 and 2011, the Lower Valley Advisory Group recommended to the county that densities in the Lower Valley be reduced both on the valleys about the impact of further subdivision on water availability, wildlife habitat, particularly mule deer and endangered fish species, rural character, and other qualities considered important by community members. From that perspective, the time to make these changes is long overdue, and we are hopeful that the county will carefully consider the advisory group's recommendations when completing the draft comprehensive plan and zoning alternatives and the draft EIS. At this time, we support this interim measure.
Thank you. Kate?
My name's Katie Haven. I live in McFarland Creek, Lower Methow. So this is just going to be very brief. I want to echo the previous speaker's reference to the Lower Valley Advisory Group and road signed in 2000. Lower density is more suited to sustainability of McFarland Creek water availability and.
Could you give the court
Yeah.
report, please? Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, Kate. All right, so seeing no more unless, no,
Is good. It's above the line. For DOE, it's all the way up to the school.
physically around there that these numbers will work, in my opinion.
Nor, which something that really needs to be explored, nor does that actually show the number of irrigated agricultural ground that some of those lots underlie.
Mhm.
And if part of our, part of this, the strategies for a lot of these community members. So,
I agree.
sorry, this is, I would move to keep the interim controls in place as
resolution. Correct?
Yes.
Staff interprets the motion, certainly a subset of that. Leaving the interim controls in place will be remanded to the planning commission for review with the revisions to the zone code.
Okay. Second. Discussion. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Agenda, by way of almost housekeeping, I said, well, no, one's a relatively major discussion item. One, in terms of my budget, we've talked in past about the need to amend my budget to take into account the additional expenditures that are going to come about now with the WRIA 49 Planning Unit Award, the additional money we obtained in the previous contract with the Voluntary Stewardship Program, and now the new contract with the Voluntary Stewardship Program. All of that together, minus what is currently in my professional services line, will be about $100,000 supplemental. All of that, of course, is money that will be reimbursed by grant. So any expenses attached to that amendment, when you see it, will be offset by the revenues that we then subsequently bill to grants. Now, there's some additional expenses we'll bill to the grants besides those paid out of professional services, but those are already contemplated in your budget. Pieces of my salary, pieces of Angie's salary, those sorts of things. So that'll be revenue in, but they're not directly tied, other than in our report and billing, to any particular other expense item. Position to facilitate that work. So the budget amendment you will see will eliminate the funding for that position. I have not put in any revenues or expenses for the well tracking grant because we haven't had it awarded yet. In talking with our auditor, she suggested we just not until that happens. Now, so that will probably yet to be done this year. If the WRIA 49 planning unit is to let you know when that then does come across your desk, and because it's an additional appropriation of money in my budget, there will be a public hearing. Before we get, well, let's talk, following up our discussion of this morning regarding Oroville EMS, Mr. Mullins did call me, and he said that he had contacted the Chronicle and had pulled the letter that he had submitted. He assures me it'll still go in, but he wanted to do some additional work on it. So he'll be in contact, according to our conversation after the meeting this morning. He'll contact me so he can develop what he would suggest are some alternative models for service delivery. So the other item is, harken back, it's been under discussion on and off for several weeks, if not months now. It's regarding the Crown Columbia Water Resources application for that water right they had, or water claim actually, that is now before the Water Conservancy Board.
Is that
Pardon?
Lundgren's water?
Yes, that's it. They talked at the time about asking us to be lead agency in conducting the environmental review. We had not received a formal request. I now have that formal request in front of me. They're going to make some changes to it, so I don't have it in front of you for action today. I just wanted to let you know that we will likely see that request. I'll prepare a more detailed briefing. There is some question on my mind, there's some question on the part of the applicant whether environmental review is even required. I submit it is. The Water Conservancy Board obviously agrees. We'll obviously deal with that as we get to it. The applicant has submitted some environmental documents, which I have not begun the review of, pending more detailed and formal requests from the Water Conservancy Board, and whatever decision collectively we make. It's county's resources, obviously. You control that. There are some vehicles, depending upon if we opt to take lead agency in terms of funding that effort. So there's a lot of discussion yet to have.
So I have a question, just in thinking of this, just right off the top of my head. Has their proposal said how many acres that there was under irrigation? How many acres they're proposing to take out of irrigation and keep in irrigation?
It does. Yeah, I can't give you those numbers off the top of my head, but the applicant did send those sorts of materials in along with an environmental checklist. The amount of water, then keep in mind their request was to keep some of the agricultural acreage irrigated and in production. And it sticks in my head 125 acres, although that
Out of how many?
I don't remember, Commissioner. So anyway, the moral of the story, without relying on that number, they want to keep some of the ag land in production. They want to put some of the water in trust. The amount of water that they believe is actually available, once you take into account that, keep in mind it was a water claim. It wasn't a certificate of water right, it was a water claim. When you go through the preliminary analysis, in terms of what's been put to beneficial use, what may have been relinquished, those sorts of things. The number, and I don't recall the number, but the number that they're proposing that is available is significantly less than what they proposed when they came through the door. So, all of that sort of thing would obviously be sorted out through the review process. As I read the environmental laws, 197.11 and our own code for that matter, while you can maybe split hairs whether it's an appropriation, new appropriation of water, or simply a transfer of existing water, that may be a legal point we could debate. It still goes beyond the threshold in terms of that categorical exemption, so I think it's subject to SEPA review.
So
There is an appeal process. If they disagree, then they can certainly bring that up.
So this has happened on and off through this county for a long time now. Has any other ones gone through SEPA?
Department of Ecology, larger ones. And the water, I don't know if the Water Conservancy Board is actually. So I can't answer your question. I don't know.
So why when the Water Conservancy Board is an extension of DOE, why is Okanogan County being asked to do SEPA?
Well, I don't know that I can specifically answer that. The Department of Ecology sits in a review position. Now the applicant could have applied directly to the Department of Ecology for their review. They did not. They applied to the Water Conservancy Board. So the Water Conservancy Board would be responsible for conducting the review. They don't believe they have adequate staff or resources to do the environmental analysis, so they have come to us, I assume, as a logical choice in that we do environmental reviews, not necessarily of this nature, but environmental reviews.
Do we have a fee schedule for performing SEPA?
Well, we have a fee schedule. However, and without front-loading any decision I might make, depending on what that might be, if it in fact was a determination of significance which triggers an environmental impact statement, the course of action would be for the planning department, a development agreement with the applicant to determine how that would be paid for.
Gotcha.
And I don't know that we've done that here. We may well have way back before my time with the landfill or something. We haven't had anything of this magnitude in recent history, other than some of the other water projects proposed. The Department of Ecology and the Planning Department acted as co-leads. So, different ways to have the discussion. I'll wait until they get me the more formal agreement. I'll look at the materials that have been submitted. I'll get those to the commissioners, and we can make our decision. Back to your question, whether any others have gone through SEPA. I know many of them don't, but most of them, if not all, I'm not sure that I've seen a water claim that somebody tried to transfer.
You've always seen water rights.
They're generally water rights, which obviously is a different thing. altogether, so, this is a bit different. At any rate, tell the story, when they come back with their, further request, if you will, a more detailed request, we'll talk about it and see what the commissioners would be interested in having us do. So going now to your actual agenda, the WRIA 49 Watershed Planning Group met on July 11th. We had a discussion in terms of their water budget for the next 20 years. They haven't decided which approach in terms of aspect or DOE guidelines they want to take. And in fact, the Department of Ecology has signaled that they're actually reviewing the guidelines they put out, mostly because they use 4/10 of an acre instead of the 4/10 of an acre instead of the half acre, 5/10. That 9044-050 actually allows you to use. Now, the reason I want to have a discussion with the commissioners, so you're kind of tracking.
Can I stop for just, so,
Sure.
but aspect use 1/10 of an
1/10,
acre?
yes,
As, right?
correct.
Right.
And that was, you recall, that was based on the study they did in 2011, where they looked at aerial photography and different things like that and arrived at that as what they believe to be the average throughout the basin. The Department of Ecology used 4/10 of an acre, as I understand it, mostly because they used 4/10 of an acre. There wasn't anything magical about it necessarily. But what was in,
Other than it wasn't 5/10.
other than it was a 5/10 of an acre, what came into the discussion more interesting to me, and I do think it will come up again, not only in this forum but in others. And we've had this discussion in part before. When you read 9044-050, the permit exempt well statute, it sets aside water for domestic, or sets aside water, it sets a permitting threshold for domestic use, in-house, and generally that's interpreted. Half-acre lawn, non-commercial garden, for which no actual gallonage was attached, stock watering, same thing, and 5,000 gallons per day for industrial use, which Kim Case expanded to include commercial. Everyone's in agreement with that. What the planning unit wrestled with for a while is whether we should include in our water budget any numbers for outdoor watering under the banner of that was a separate use of water identified in 9044-050. The discussion went back and forth a bit, and I introduced the idea that while DOE, Department of Ecology and Interpretation, has arguably expanded a bit the definition of domestic to include some level of outdoor watering, which perhaps isn't contemplated in 9044-050, which perhaps hasn't been supported by litigation and that sort of thing. Back to the Five Corners case, I believe is the title. If we don't mitigate it, then we're not authorized to allow it. So, we are authorized right now to impair in-stream flow for domestic use. Obviously, if domestic use only means the water used in the house, then any water outside of the house would be subject to interruption when we go below stream flow, which has been all but 4 years in the last 20 or so. So, if we mitigate it, if we include some level of outdoor irrigation under the banner of domestic use, and the numbers you saw in our earlier public hearing both contemplate, in the case of aspect, 1/10 of an acre outdoor, in the case of DOE, 4/10 of an acre outdoor.
Craig, can I ask you a question just to make sure that I'm tracking something correctly? We're always talking, when we're talking about 49, the in-stream flow, we're always talking about the Okanogan River, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, and tributaries and everything attached to it.
Well,
The Okanogan
where's the
Basin.
flow gauge at, though? That
The one we used was Milan.
Milan, okay. So, isn't incoming rivers on the Okanogan controlled by a dam?
Oh yes, there's a lot of unnatural circumstances that control.
So, which supersedes the in-stream flows? Is it the dam controls, or, because I don't understand that. If we're if you're down below in-stream flows for 16 of the last 20 years?
Do you have that PowerPoint on that?
Yes.
Then is there a water level in a lake that supersedes the in-stream flows?
All sorts of dams that controls like a series.
Do you only want that? I have just the spreadsheet.
You don't have the PowerPoint?
Yeah, I have the whole thing too.
Go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint. Please. 'Cause that list was the last slide on it, right?
But the reason that I ask is because like the Methow River, obviously, there's no dams, no nothing. The water you get is the water you get. But up
Oops.
there,
Dang it.
you can turn more water down or not turn water down or whatever. So what's the controlling factor on that?
Well, that has actually come up, Commissioner.
Well, it's actually controlled by a joint resolution, MOU, whatever you want to call it, by the BC and
Federal government?
So I guess when.
The
Okay,
department,
no, I'm sorry. So if BC and the federal government have a joint
the
resolution,
ability to control.
a joint resolution that has the ability to control the level of a lake
Yep.
that feeds
Which-
into a river, then why are the people down here getting punished
I'll just.
for for a federal joint resolution?
well, that subject has come up in discussion. And if you think about it from a simplistic level, if more water is released as a result of the treaty, you may never again be below
Right.
the
Right.
target flow. I mean, that's
Same thing with the
just math, but,
Columbia River Treaty.
you know, so understood, and I say that comes up every once in a while. The situation we're in, of course, is that the state government has identified the Okanogan, WRIA 49, as a Hearst-affected basin because we're below in-stream flow on a fairly regular basis. And as such, we are required to project what water we will likely use in the next 20 years and how to mitigate that.
Do you know if you can get spill measurements from dams over the course of those years?
I think so.
So could you correlate spill measurements to the in-stream flow values? I mean,
I do a pointer exercise,
Yeah.
see what the numbers are. You know, you go back and you can probably, I can't speak to '09, as I recall, someone told me that was a pretty low snowpack year. And, you know, you have some obvious weather sorts of related issues. Now, in terms of the spill, we'll take a look and see what we can find out. It's an interesting question. But, once you go to the slide where we showed the water use,
and I guess, so are those, and I'm sorry, 'cause this shows my ignorance about up there, but are those power producing dams? Or are those
This one?
Which one?
the ones that would come into the Okanogan? They're not,
No.
right? They're strictly
No,
irrigation.
mean, and Zola Dam either, well, you know, historians, but Zola Dam does not produce power.
Right.
It's water control over
It's irrigation, right?
I'm not aware any of them produce electricity. That's all, I mean,
But they're raising dams for irrigation. is that correct?
OTID gets their water source out of
Okay.
facilities, as one example. And just for the sake of the discussion they're having, while they haven't arrived at which approach or a different approach they want to take in terms of how much water each household will use, they did agree to use building permits. Building permits per year actually results in a higher population increase than does the OFM projections. Got a lot of different explanations for that. Simply because someone built a new house doesn't mean they don't already live in the county. Families separate, I mean, there's all sorts of different things where that calculation can be really not particularly accurate. But it does give us an idea that on the assumption, again, 63 per year for the last 8 years, we're talking WRIA 49, unincorporated. Do the 2.36 multiplication, number of people on the average per household in the census. If you use the Aspect Consulting's average, which including the outdoor irrigation consumptive is 205 gallons a day, 365 days a year, 1260 households, 289 acre feet of water is all they would have to mitigate over the next 20 years in WRIA 49.
Wait a minute, where did they come out with 205 gallons per day?
That's your Aspect Consumptive analysis.
Consumption for over here?
No, this is the WRIA 48 data. We walked it over, there hasn't
I
been,
thought it was 710 gallons consumption.
that's peak.
Okay, right.
Your peak was, actually your peak was 1,000 and some odd.
So they said that over here you can average it out?
That seems to be the approach. In terms of our water budget, remember, we're not talking about Camel Gwen or any of those other things.
Right.
We're just talking about how much water, on a daily average, would each household consume.
Oh,
And if you use the 1/10 of an acre calculation along.
yeah, because you're having to mitigate it for, over there we got a reserve, and so that's why the peak makes a
Yeah,
difference
that's
over there.
different beast over there.
I get it.
Yeah, we're just
Okay.
talking your consumptive over here, and that's what we came up with. So say, here's the snapshot of their methodology. Since I'm gonna use indoor residential is only 30.
Okay, then, so I got another question for you. Since waters of this, so, well, I guess that goes to in-stream flows. I guess if you know, the old use it or lose it, right? Well, the reason they put that into place is so that they could take it and put it to a better beneficial use. If you weren't using water, then somebody else should get to use it. So, like, any irrigated land that has been fallowed by state entities buying it or something like that, are they taking that into account?
We were told by the Department of Ecology, unless that happened for the specific purpose of mitigating exempt well use, no. So the different water rights that have been the land is what's generally been purchased, and the water right was pertinent to the land, went back into in-stream flow, any of those other sorts of things that have occurred historically, we can't count,
Because you're still below in-stream flow.
presumably. So, and then interestingly enough, the legislative objective is not that we have to get above in-stream flow. The legislative objective is, or directive I should say, is that we have to mitigate water use. Now, going back to the other slide that shows your projected water use, you know, your 289 acre feet barely registers on the flow gauge. But that's what we're charged to do. So, and that's the discussion they're having. They have arrived at using building permits and the averages, and in the prior 10 years, there was an average, I think, 70 per year, but that of course included a lot of that building up in Veranda Beach, most of which aren't even on permit exempt wells. The more recent analysis, 2010 to 2000 through 2008, came up with a 63.
So 289 acre feet of water is all that needs to be mitigated for.
Using that figure.
That's like one hayfield.
Columbia River office has a 300 some odd acre foot water right available. But
For purchase?
it is, and we need to talk about that at some point. Yeah, you might recall, Commissioner, actually it's been around for a while. And there's never been a formal exchange between the Columbia River office. Talked about it a little bit, but back at that time, they didn't want to get into the business of water banking.
So right now, if this analysis goes through, you could have one project that mitigates all water use in the county.
Theoretically,
Or not the county, I'm sorry.
I mean, and that's going to depend on whether we can take it as a basin-wide approach, or we have to drill in a little more tightly. And as you know, there's been a fair amount of discussion in terms of some of the tributaries being more water stressed than others. So back in the idea that the perfect mitigation is same place, same time. If you're building up in the tunk, but you're mitigating it down on the main stem, will that pass muster? Some say yes, some say no. That's gonna be part of the discussion.
Well, yeah, but I mean, let's get over the fact where there's probably some places that just isn't gonna physically have water available. Building, it's gonna go on in the next 20 years with that one right.
On a basin-wide basis, it could be done. Keeping in mind that OTID actually has received approval for their water bank as well. So there's already some, but it was a fair amount of water. But I don't remember. So anyway, that's the discussion that the planning unit's having. One of the things, if they're successful in getting the one extra pot of money that they want to do is that basin by basin assessment. Of course, what they're looking to do is to try to figure out if some of the basins are more vulnerable to being water stressed due to either development opportunity or already existing over appropriation of water or all the above. So assuming that she's generally right, it's 5,600 acre feet, so obviously that's.
Lundgren River means them too, wouldn't it?
Yes. Well, I think it came out of Pine Creek.
Oh,
So there may be some opportunity a little off Main Stem, but the discussion goes on. I'd say that we had the discussion about kind of the legal issues. The board elected to table that discussion, the planning unit elected to table that discussion. They did arrive at building permits is how they want to project out the building level. They're still talking about what they're gonna use for the actual amount of water each household would use. So those discussions are ongoing. It was actually a pretty good meeting. We made some substantial progress. One of the things that's on your agenda I want to talk about, we've talked about the water summit. We have that letter. Did you have that still loaded on there? Last week, the invitation.
Probably. If you sent it to me, yeah, I should.
I mean, we haven't set a date. We really haven't set the structure per se. If the commissioners desire to move ahead with that, I'm going to suggest that we find a facilitator to help run with just somebody who understands how to keep a meeting on track, how to establish or help establish the agenda, and keep us.
Two come to mind already. So the
Watershed Council.
Watershed Council has a facilitator for Water 2066.
Mm-hmm.
And then the lady that did the, is she a facilitator that did the grizzly bear stuff? Or is she a lawyer?
I'm not sure.
Hey,
You're gonna say the conflict manager for WWS.
No.
And we can't afford $450 million a year.
There are options. I know Kittitas County just recently brought in a facilitator to orchestrate a discussion amongst the county commissioners. Their background in local government. They have absolutely no natural resource planning or any other attachments other than how to run a meeting. You know, there's different names. And then, I mean, it'll cost us something, probably. How much, I don't know. But just thinking about this thing, I mean, I can run a meeting, however, no one, you all, so therefore I'm not really doing my job at that point. You know, and if we bring some of the organizations in that are very active in these discussions, you'll probably have that same concern about impartiality. If we can find someone with the credentials that has absolutely no real tie to that, do that. They deal with budget and things like that. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention it. I can do some reference calls if the commissioners like. try
You
to.
referenced, I mean, like I said, that lady that.
Say, we
that's
got-
doing the water 2066 stuff.
I'll double check with the Watershed Council. I said I know they've used some folk. I mean, we have other people who do facility tied to some of the water resource activist groups.
I
on
think
that.
I think she helped with the, I think she helped with Kittitas County.
I'm sorry?
I think she helped with Kittitas County.
We may be talking about the same person.
Water.
Oh,
Skagit, that's right.
okay.
Thank you, Lord.
Say that this last effort was fairly recently. The Board of Commissioners was having some communication challenges, so they brought in a facilitator to do what a facilitator does, find the common ground, keep the meeting on track, keep everything organized. I don't offer that necessarily even as a suggestion. It just got me to thinking that a facilitator is probably a good idea. And someone with a little less attachment to the subject matter might be a good idea too, so.
Yeah.
But I'll make some phone calls. I'll check around and see what kind of names I can come up with. With Commissioner Branch not present, do you want to, I haven't made any changes to the mitigation language. I haven't
We don't even.
looked at the
without even looking at it.
I haven't looked at the resolution. I believe Mr. Getches will discuss with you in the morning the paperwork from the Yakima Nation and all of that, so. So unless there's something in particular on that, we'll just bring it back next week. Comprehensive plan, the plan commission will look at the capital facility plan draft on July 22nd. So, of course, what they look at it for is consistency with the comprehensive plan. I sent it out over the weekend for people to run their thumb down, take another look at. Now again, plan commission, they just look at the different proposals and projects and determine if they're consistent with the comprehensive plan. Everything touches on it before you adopt it. The draft environmental impact statement over the weekend, I put it together. I'm not going to suggest it's an exhaustive analysis, but it is a reasonable discussion. Angie went through and reformatted and had already agreed to do a special meeting. So what I've done is create a 45-day comment period, a little past the halfway point. People will have a chance 19th. They'll begin deliberations on August 26th. My hope is we can get through that in relative short order. You should have it in front of you then, here at any rate. Well, actually, I skipped something on an earlier item, Commissioners. Aspect Consulting, they'll now do their presentation on August 1st is our next planning unit meeting. I do have 2 copies of that agreement. If the Commissioners, as lead entity, are willing to sign it. You recall, we had a question about the detail in the billing. $2,500 is the suggested fee.
Does it need a motion?
Pardon?
Does it need a motion?
That would require your signature as chairman of Board of County Commissioners acting in your capacity as lead entity for the WRIA 49 planning unit. The amount of the agreement is $2,500. That would be for travel time, materials, and their appearance at the August 1st Watershed Planning Unit meeting.
Might as well.
That's a contract between Aspect and Untitled Chapter.
Yeah.
So I would move to authorize the chair to sign the contract order for project number 190259 between Aspect Consulting and Okanogan County,
Second. So, motion second, discussion.
in the amount of $2,500.
Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
And as we discussed previous, this is paid for out of the planning unit money. The presentation is at the request of the planning unit. So, let's see, I think we've covered the high points on the comprehensive plan. Again, August, I think I put 16th in here, but it's actually the 19th, is the public hearing. 26th then. will be when they probably pick up deliberations, depending upon how many people obviously testify. If we can't get through the hearing on the 29th, that's why we have them in proximity. They'll just continue it for the following week and then begin deliberations. Census 2020, just a reminder, we have the July 23rd outreach meeting coming up. The M-tank sealing project, Beeman's hasn't completed their bid package yet, or at least I haven't seen. Under the Champerty Shore Sewer Extension, by way of update, I talked to the assessor, Ms. Gilman, and you'll recall there was some concern, if you will, that the treasurer had expressed about going ahead with the bond issue. One of the questions was, she wasn't completely clear how it would come about, what the assessor's role would be, what her role would be. In talking to Larry, he believes it's essentially the same kind of a special purpose district as the lake management that we enacted last year. So it's not a junior taxing district, and it lost the construction season for this year. By the time we get through form, the assessments levied, it would be a billing through the treasurer's office, just like the lake management district, collected annually. That would pay debt service on the bond. So I'll continue my work on that. I think those are the agenda items to cover today, Commissioners. Anything for me? Very good. Early afternoon break.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep. Monday came in like a lion and went out like a lamb.
There you go. Indeed, indeed.
Thought that was interesting. We decided to retract that.
Exactly.
Now.
Yeah.
Oh, one other, we're not gonna talk about it because you already set the date for it, but the purchase and sale agreement and the extension, addendum extending it was signed by all parties, took it out to 5 o'clock, August 5th. So,
All right.
now I'm done. Now I'm done. Very good.
I've already reviewed the meeting.
Yeah, I'm just about through.
Maybe I have a quick question. Can you elaborate a little bit on what that is?
Her name escapes me, but the area.
Okay, so someone from the census is gonna give a little
We
presentation.
sent the invitation down to the cities and
Okay,
different junior taxing districts, so now I have a few more to send out. But
okay,
That's what that's all about.
Okay.
Community workshop.
Right.